Hey guys, Toolman Tim here. So if you're seeing this, it means I'm on the road. I've got a 40-day road trip roughly. The routine. I'm traveling down to North Carolina, up to Kansas, down to Tennessee, work on the land, and a bunch of that. So I wanted to give you something that you could have while I was gone so that you wouldn't have to go without an episode or go back and listen to some of the old stuff. So you guys know I have been uh, researching the history of modern preparedness. And part of that has been picking up some kind of artifacts from modern survival and prepping. And this one here comes from Don Stevens. I would call him the grandfather of modern prepping. He coined the term, him and his wife Barbie coined the term retreater. And that was really the first people to do that, to kind of step away from society, at least in the modern sense, to be prepared for a possible collapse or just make their life better. So I'm going to read you an excerpt from the start of this book. I hope you enjoy it. And yeah, let's dive in, guys. So this is Personal Protection Here and Now by Don Stevens. This is the introduction. I'm going to read you 5 or 6 pages here. The term vision has several meanings. In its most literal sense, it refers to the ability of one's eyes to perceive the world around him. In terms of this meaning, good vision would indicate being able to focus clearly on both details and wide vistas near and far away, without distortion, blur of illusion. Unfortunately, most of us have less than ideal vision. Some are nearsighted, seeing clearly only what is right before them. Others are farsighted, seeing well at a distance but having difficulty perceiving what is near at hand, and still others have astigmatism, causing improper focusing or tunnel vision, allowing them to perceive only a narrow part of what is before them. Another meaning of the word vision is wisdom in foreseeing what is possible or likely to occur in the future. And here too, optical maladies are common. We have all met people with tunnel vision who can readily project the future of architecture or professional tennis or whatever, but without relating it to the rest of life and the way that such things as the economy, sociological trends, resource depletion, or environmental quality will affect their narrow field of interest or their own lives. We've also perceived those with a visual distortion, which causes them to see things in a slanted way. Some think the entire world is in the midst of a Bolshevik revolution with a commie behind every bush or political event. They feel the rest of us are a bit blind if we can't see it. And those of us who don't feel they see pinkos everywhere have an astigmatism. The same thing goes for those who envision the world in the grip of some other conspiracy involving the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, Harry Kissinger, or whomever, versus those who don't. But more important to me personally is the problem of near or farsightedness. As an individual most concerned with the apparent direction of our economy is ever more rapidly drifting, the social trauma which either collapse or depressionary readjustment of that economy will almost certainly produce, and the ways individuals can avoid becoming victims of it, I'm troubled by how many of those around suffer from nearsightedness, living just for today and to hell with tomorrow. For me, it is so uncomfortable to deal with people of this type that I find myself gradually cutting my ties with all those unwaveringly committed to this immediate hedonistic approach. Let me stop right here for a second, guys. This was written in the late 60s, early 70s. I forgot to mention these were pamphlets, basically mini books that they self-published, him and his wife. This was kind of the first prepper press or the first, survival bookstore, that sort of thing. And it sounds like he had a vision of the future. Pardon the pun. All right, we're going to continue into his words now. On the other hand, among those who, by my standards, have a pretty good view of what probably lies some way down the road and who are making concrete moves to protect themselves from a general crisis, there are clearly some who have lost short-range perspective. Among recent correspondence, I have received letters from several retreaters who lost goods they had been putting by to burglary. I know of one who fell victim to robbery, another who was killed in a public place, and still others who are leaving themselves open to similar risks every day. So farsightedness alone can be nearly as dangerous as myopia. Likewise, although you've established what seems to be the best answer to the future need for a retreat in farther places, or at least working on it diligently, with what time and money you can muster, it would be imprudent to overlook the personal hazards and mini crisis you will well encounter where you live before the big blow. His quotation marks. The pamphlet is intended to help delineate This pamphlet is intended to help delineate the kinds of hazards, mini crises, and personal emergencies you need to prepare for, so you'll be around and in possession of your survival goods when the day for real retreat arrives. It will also help those committed to remaining in urban areas even in times of complete collapse, despite the suicidal nature of such a decision, to be better prepared than the many others who will be forced to play the deadly game of looter and lootee. Let me drop in here again for another little commentary. How close does that sound to the modern tenets of survivalism today, right? Here he is saying, yes, prepare for the future. But if you don't prepare for everyday life and the present right now, it doesn't make any sense. And I think we've probably built on that over the preceding 6 decades since he, kind of coined the term retreater. But the original sentiment is there. Prepare for tomorrow and live for today. Sources of hazard. The first step in such preparation is isolating the sources of trouble to be avoided. Many of those future problems can be foreseen from current events and trends. For example, I believe the 17% nationwide serious crime increases for 1974, up from an average 3% annual increases for the 3 previous years, reflects the growing monetary instability and can be expected to continue as long as unemployment and inflation leave desperate people, without other apparent alternatives. And lest it be assumed that this is only an inner city problem, 1974's one-year increase for the suburbs were 20% and rural areas chalked up to 21%. Looking at it another way, not only is our law enforcement system failing to prevent crime, but also, once it has occurred, only 20% of reported offenses resulted in eventual arrest. So one can expect neither protection nor restitution, and according to FBI preliminary reports, both violent and property crime rates are still climbing in 1975. Let me interject here for another minute. Here's the thing, and this is why I feel the need to prepare for your day-to-day life is so darn important. Because when you take a narrow view, in this instance, the author Don did perhaps a bit, looking at the mid-70s at this point, and looked into the future and thought, okay, if things keep getting this bad, things are going to be really, really bad. But guess what? They didn't, at least not in the short term. So whenever we get bent out of shape over some latest crime statistic or some political scandal, and we think, yep, this is it. The collapse is coming. I'm running away from from society, and I'm going to go live in a cave. Well, cool. If you want to live in a cave, you should probably set that up 20 years ago, right? But when it comes down to it, we can predict bad things happening. But if a person lives their entire life thinking, I'm going to prep for the worst case scenario, and that's all you're living for, you're going to miss your entire life. So spend your entire life living the way you want to live and prep for the future as well. But private crime represents only a small part of the picture. As dramatic as a 300% increase in aggravated assault, robbery, forcible rape, and murder per 100,000 population in the last 13 years appears, it's only small potatoes to the losses suffered by all of us through overtaxation and inflation. While the politicians are talking about their wars on crime, they are dipping ever deeper into our earnings to finance boondoggles of every description and justifying it by saying it's for our own good. After all, they have to inflate and spend to counteract the recessionary trend resulting from the slowdown of their last round of inflating. Sounds familiar. And all the while our incomes are rising in a vain effort to keep up with the insidious inflation, we are moving into high tax brackets so they catch us coming and going. So we have to try to protect ourselves from both public and private crime. Another and related area of vulnerability is that of sabotage and terrorism. The Weather Underground, the SLA, and other militant groups that have given up any hope of accomplishing their goals through the entrenched political system are turning more and more to random violence and sabotage of buildings, power lines, and other utilities in an expression of their frustration. Insert Timothy McVeigh in 9/11 there, guys. This guy was 20 years too early, but he was a prophet. Unfortunately, these attacks on the so-called establishment more often than not bring the greatest hardship to just plain people who depend on availability of electric power, telephone service, uncontaminated water, etc., for their daily living. For symbolic reasons, a number of prognosticators expect 75 and 76 will be years when this terrorism is likely to be greatly stepped up in response to the bicentennial events. So this too is a hazard to be considered in reducing your vulnerability. This leads logically, temporary shortages is the underlying title here. This leads logically into the second major problem area, that more generally of interruptions of the supply of essentials. We have already suffered shortages of certain foods, gasoline, and other petrochemical derivatives, electric power, paper products, and other important items. We have also seen commodities priced up and out of reach of many people for one reason or another. If price and wage controls are reimposed as a panacea for the inflationary boom, which must grow out of present deficit spending, I believe we are in for more of the same, only worse. Whenever government tries to manipulate the free market, distortions result which hamper productivity. Why should the farmer spend more for unfrozen fertilizer, fuel, weed, and insect control chemicals than he can recover from the sale of his crop at frozen prices? Increasing his volume won't help if he is losing 20 cents a bushel in production costs. And price controls that assure that you won't have to pay more than X amount for a product will soon mean little if any of that product is produced or offered for sale. We are still suffering from the effects of the last price and wage fiasco. But as surely as a new wave of inflation is on its way, we can bet that the bureaucracy will turn to similar methods again. And when it does, those who haven't stockpiled essentials will, in the end, be the ones paying the price. If things get bad enough, we can expect other effects to present themselves. One is rationing, at least of the most critical items, and the black market that will inevitably result to supply those who can afford its prices. Those on the lower rungs of the economic ladder won't be able to pay the illicit tariff, so they will turn to other responses. We may well face one or a series of crippling nationwide or general strikes. Even if those fail to thrust the nation into total economic crisis, they will certainly further reduce productivity and bring more destructive mandates from government. Sounds like he's talking about 2023. A final factor that may be a major cause of at least temporary shortages of essentials is the lack of basic resources due either to depletion or to international manipulation by foreign cartels, weary of being bled dry by the one country which consumes 80% of the world's raw materials. This kind of concerted action also might well be an outgrowth of political adventures, such as a renewal of heated Near East hostilities, the myth of energy independence notwithstanding. A shutoff of foreign oil would result in domestic shortages of everything from agricultural products to hula hoops. Quality of living. In addition to temporary unavailabilities of products and services, the economic decay which surrounds us is already reflected in a general decline in the quality of life. You can see it everywhere. Remember when a service station was just that? The attendants used to hurry out to your car, greet you with a smile, wash your windows, check your tires, water, and oil, while waiting for the tank to fill. Then they'd hand you a free glass or some buffalo chip stamps along with a smile and invite you to come back again. So much for nostalgia. Now you're lucky if you can get gas. The only service offered most places is self-service. And products are the same way. Doesn't that sound an awful lot about, an old man yells at clouds like we do at Walmart with the self-serve checkouts at this point? And products are the same way. The fruit offered in the stores today at 3 times the price would have been considered culls 5 years ago. And when you buy a new car, chances are it comes with a 12,000-mile warranty instead of the old 5-year one. And you'll need it because you're likely to find the contraption was just barely thrown together and needs a lot of attention to bring it up to standard before the warranty expires. The motorhome we purchased recently developed over 40 problems in the first 6 months, and despite numerous visits to the dealership, the air conditioner has never worked. When we stayed in Chicago's newest and finest hotel recently, the plumbing didn't function properly, the color TV operated only in shades of green, and a number of unfortunate patrons were trapped in the elevator for over an hour and a half, while the rest of us listened to the emergency bells ring on and on. At home, It is getting so that we can't complete about 10% of our direct dial telephone calls without operator assistance, and I understand we should be thankful we can even get phones since some parts of the country aren't so blessed. Further, the Environmental Protection Agency recently reported that it had found 97 of our major cities were doling out polluted drinking water, and the smog problem is no longer monopolized by Southern California or the Big Apple. Parts of northern Idaho smell like the gates of hell when the air conditioners are right. And when I last flew into Denver, it was though a pall of something much more deadly than split pea soup. Let's face it, in the United States, the quality of life is going down the tube, and it's going to take individual action to minimize your inconvenience and hazard from that decay. Okay, and now I'm back. 15-minute break turned into an entire day. So if you wonder why I'm wearing a different shirt, well, that'll tell you. General and personal emergencies. Finally, there is the potential for a number of real emergencies that has either been there all along or has developed as a result of our overdependence on highly technical and very vulnerable sources of supply and transport, of our own personal carelessness. These are both the direct and indirect effects of natural calamities such as earthquakes, floods, tornadoes, blizzards, and hurricanes. It is hard to believe that some part of the over 400 miles of canals, tunnels, pumping stations, and reservoirs which bring water to Southern California would not be interrupted by an earth tremor anywhere. Along its route, along its route, the magnitude suffered by Alaska in 1964 or San Francisco in 1906. Even after the relatively mild Sylmar quake recently, water was selling in the stricken area for over $5 a gallon. It's better to have your own stored. Another general emergency would be the outbreak of some uncontrollable epidemic. Bacteriologists are with increasing regularity discovering superbugs on their culture plates, which have survived and developed resistances to all but the very newest antibiotics. Their nightmares hinge around the day one shows up, which remains unaffected by anything that pharmaceutical industry has ready to throw at it. If such a contagion got started with our modern network of airlines and the popularity of international travel, it could well be spread worldwide before it was even isolated in the lab. See March 2020. Short of this kind of general medical emergency, how many of us are prepared to deal with the loss of income and goods that would result from personal illness? How many could get by through an extended period of unemployment? How many are prepared to detect and control a small fire at home before it becomes an inferno, wiping out all that can't be replaced by less than adequate insurance? How many carry in their car or other vehicles the supplies to sustain themselves until help could arrive if they broke down in the desert or slid off a winter road in sub-zero weather? How well are you prepared to be self-sufficient in these and the wide range of other possible areas of personal emergency? It may well all sound a bit overwhelming, but it really isn't. You can do it. Although the range of emergencies one should prepare for is broad, the solutions to most overlap. There are only a limited number of basic human needs to be met, and these can be taken care of through the below suggested steps, which should be well within your abilities once you have made a personal commitment to accomplish them. These are presented in checklist format, so you can deal with them one by one, and so you can scratch those dealt with already. If you felt the number of items remaining is great, don't allow yourself to be overwhelmed by it. Just work on them as you can, drawing pleasure from each new area you can check off, and try to keep your preparations in balance, avoiding too much emphasis on one at the expense of another. After all, a gun without ammo is useless, and food without equipment to prepare it or water to drink is nearly so as well. In this world, there are few absolutely sure things, and even if you follow all the suggestions below, you can still be caught by the unexpected. But you will have the peace of mind derived from knowing that you have pared the odds down to a minimum. In arranging the list, actually, I want to go back and read that line again, guys. In this world, there are few absolutely sure things, and even if you follow all of the suggestions below, you can still be caught by the unexpected. But you will have the peace of mind derived from knowing that you have pared the odds down to a minimum. To me, that defines preparedness to a T. In arranging the list, I have tried to give general categories in order of sequence based on their survival priority, i.e. those most basic to life sustenance first, with those concerned only with reducing the inconvenience of living through temporary problems further down the line. I trust it will prove valuable in your own planning, and I would enjoy hearing from you regarding items left off which you feel would be included. This was an excerpt from Personal Protection Here and Now by Don Stevens. The genesis for this book came about in the mid to late 60s. It says right here, I'm going to read you about the author as well while we're at it. There he is. It says, Don Stevens, originally educated in architecture and environmental design, now devotes full time to gathering and sharing the reasoning, concepts, and techniques of personal survival and retreat preparation. Articles by or about him have appeared in the LA Times, the New Yorker, Mother Earth News, Time, Newsweek, and the Canadian Magazine. And he writes regularly for several of the leading hard money newsletters. With his wife Barbie, he writes, publishes, and distributes a number of booklets, including The Retreater's Bibliography. He makes numerous appearances on TV and radio, speaks before college and business audiences nationwide, and still finds time for personal consultations and further research and writing. His family practices what he advocates, and he has had a retreat established since 1967. The original prepper, I don't know, but the guy who really founded modern preparedness, I would say so. I hope you enjoyed this. This was a $3 book in the mid-70s when it was released, actually. The genesis for it started in the late 60s and even further back than that, but rather interesting. So, guys, I hope you enjoyed that look at preparedness past. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, and have a great week.